Welcome to the Life Paradox, where reality is stranger than fiction. Daniel Morgan stared out the airplane window at the city lights below, his reflection ghosting against the dark glass. 12 hours ago, he'd been in a Tokyo conference room, closing the biggest deal of his career. Now, he was on a flight back to Chicago, 48 hours earlier than expected. The decision had come suddenly. Standing there in that sleek boardroom, watching executives shake hands and exchange business cards, Daniel had been struck by a profound emptiness. Success tasted hollow without someone to share it with. And there was only one person he wanted to celebrate with. Emma, his wife of 6 years, his best friend, his rock. For the past 10 months, work had consumed him. Late-night video calls, international flights, endless meetings. Even when he was home, he wasn't really present. Emma never complained, though he sometimes caught a flicker of disappointment in her eyes when he announced yet another business trip. "Champagne, sir?" A flight attendant's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "No, thank you." Daniel smiled politely, his fingers tracing the outline of the velvet box in his jacket pocket. Inside was a platinum necklace with a sapphire pendant, Emma's birthstone. He'd purchased it at a small boutique in the Ginza district before rushing to the airport. Every paradox begins with a question. If you love unraveling life's biggest mysteries, hit subscribe and join the Life Paradox, where every story bends reality. Daniel's decision to surprise Emma had crystallized during the signing ceremony. As his pen hovered over the contract, he'd had a moment of clarity. Success meant nothing if it cost him his marriage. Not that they were in trouble. Emma was remarkably patient. But he sensed a growing distance between them. Small things, shorter phone calls, fewer texts. A certain guardedness in her voice. His colleague Thomas had commented on it just last week. "You know, marriages don't survive on autopilot." The words had lingered, worming their way into Daniel's consciousness until he couldn't ignore them. The aircraft began its descent, the cabin lights dimming. Daniel checked his watch. 11:37 at night. Emma would be asleep by now. Perfect. He imagined slipping into their bed, seeing her peaceful face, the surprise in her eyes when she woke to find him there. After landing, Daniel moved quickly through the terminal, bypassing baggage claim with just his carry-on. Outside, the April air was unexpectedly mild for Chicago. He hailed a taxi, giving the driver their address in the quiet lakeside suburb they'd chosen together, dreaming of starting a family. "Coming home or going away?" the driver asked, eyes meeting Daniel's in the rearview mirror. "Coming home," Daniel replied, unable to keep the anticipation from his voice. "Earlier than expected," the driver nodded knowingly. "Wife or girlfriend?" "Wife. She thinks I'm still in Japan." "Ah, a surprise," the driver smiled. "Those are the best moments." Daniel watched familiar neighborhoods pass by. Each mile closer to home heightened his excitement. He'd been a workaholic, putting career above everything. But this moment felt like a turning point. He would be better, more present. They would reconnect. The taxi turned onto his street, lined with elegant homes and carefully tended gardens. Their house, a charming colonial with blue shutters, came into view. Daniel noticed the living room lights were on. Strange. Emma was usually strict about turning off lights before bed. "This is me," he said, paying the driver and adding a generous tip. Standing on the sidewalk, suitcase in hand, Daniel paused to take in the scene. Their house looked different somehow. Or perhaps he was seeing it through fresh eyes. Either way, something felt off. He walked up the path, fumbling for his keys, heart racing with anticipation. What Daniel didn't know was that crossing this threshold would change everything. Spring rain had fallen earlier, leaving the pathway slick beneath Daniel's shoes as he approached the front door. Their home's facade glowed softly in the moonlight. The blue shutters Emma had insisted on. The porch swing where they'd spent countless summer evenings discussing their dreams. How many of those dreams had been deferred because of his career obsession? He noticed details he'd missed in his hurry to leave for Tokyo last month. New flower boxes beneath the windows, planted with what looked like herbs and lavender. A different, "Welcome, Matt." A small wind chime hanging from the porch ceiling that wasn't there before. Emma had been busy in his absence, making their house more of a home while he chased corporate success across the globe. Daniel set his suitcase down silently and retrieved his keys. Should he ring the doorbell? No. Too startling at midnight. Better to use his key and surprise her gently. Besides, if the lights were on, maybe she was still awake, reading in bed as she often did when he was away. The brass key slid into the lock with familiar resistance. Daniel turned it slowly, wincing at the soft click that seemed thunderous in the quiet neighborhood. He eased the door open, immediately enveloped by the scent of home, a mixture of Emma's favorite sandalwood candles, the faint aroma of whatever she'd cooked for dinner, and something else. Cologne? Daniel paused, momentarily confused. He didn't wear cologne. Inside, the house was warmer than Emma usually kept it. The entryway light was off, but golden illumination spilled from the living room down the hall. Soft music played, one of those melancholy indie bands Emma loved that Daniel could never quite appreciate. He closed the door carefully behind him, set his suitcase aside and slipped off his shoes. "Emma?" he called softly, not wanting to frighten her. No response, just the gentle strumming of guitars from the living room speakers. Daniel moved down the hallway, past family photos charting their journey together, their college graduation, their wedding day, vacations to Maine and California, the Christmas they'd spent with his parents before his father passed away. Each frame a reminder of what mattered, most what he'd been neglecting. The velvet box felt heavy in his pocket. Would a necklace be enough? Could any gift compensate for his prolonged absences? Daniel suddenly felt foolish, like a husband who forgot anniversaries and birthdays, then tried to make up for it with expensive trinkets. Emma deserved consistency, not grand gestures. As he approached the living room, Daniel noticed 2 wine glasses on the console table in the hall, both used, bearing the burgundy residue of red wine and the imprint of lips on their rims. His stomach tightened. Emma rarely drank alone. The music grew louder. Daniel could now distinguish quiet voices beneath it, murmuring, indistinct, intimate. He hesitated at the threshold of the living room, suddenly uncertain. Something felt wrong. The house didn't feel like his anymore. It felt occupied, as if he were the intruder rather than the returning husband. Daniel took a deep breath. Perhaps Emma had a friend over, her sister Caroline maybe, staying for the weekend. That would explain the second wine glass, the lights, the music. A simple, innocent explanation, yet his instincts screamed otherwise. With one more step, Daniel would have a clear view of the living room. One more step, and he would know why the house felt different, why the air seemed charged with an emotion he couldn't name but inherently feared. He thought of turning around, of walking back out the door and checking into a hotel, of preserving, for just a few more hours, the life he thought he had. But Daniel had never been a coward. And so, heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird, he stepped into the living room doorway. What he saw in that moment burned itself into his consciousness. A tableau that would haunt his dreams for months to come. A scene that instantly transformed everything he believed about his life, his marriage, and the woman he thought he knew better than anyone in the world. Daniel froze, unable to speak, unable to process. The moment stretched into an eternity as 3 people stared at each other in shocked silence, and nothing would ever be the same again. The living room had been transformed. Candles flickered on every surface, casting golden light across the walls. The furniture had been rearranged, their couch pushed against the far wall, the coffee table moved aside. In the center of the room stood a large easel supporting a nearly completed canvas. Emma sat cross-legged on a paint-splattered drop cloth, a brush in her hand, her dark hair piled messily atop her head. Beside her, a man Daniel had never seen before lounged comfortably on the floor, leaning back on his elbows. Both wore clothes smeared with paint in vibrant hues: blues, greens, intense purples. For one terrible moment, Daniel's mind leapt to the worst conclusion. Then he registered more details: the respectful distance between them, the professional atmosphere despite the intimate setting, the way the stranger immediately sat up straight when Daniel appeared. Daniel! Emma's voice was a mixture of shock, and was that dismay? She scrambled to her feet, paintbrush still in hand. "You're supposed to be in Tokyo." The stranger rose more slowly, wiping his hands on a cloth. He was about Daniel's age, with glasses and an artistic dishevelment that made Daniel instantly self-conscious of his own corporate precision. I wanted to surprise you," Daniel said lamely, his gaze moving between Emma, the stranger, and the painting on the easel. It showed a woman, clearly Emma, standing on a beach at sunset, her face turned toward the horizon, her expression one of profound longing. "This is Marcus," Emma said, gesturing to the stranger. "My art teacher." Marcus stepped forward, hand extended. "Daniel, I've heard so much about you. Emma speaks of you constantly." Daniel shook his hand automatically, noting the calluses, the paint embedded in the creases of his fingers. A working artist's hands, so different from his own office-smooth palms. "Art teacher," Daniel repeated, the words not quite computing. Emma hadn't mentioned art lessons. In fact, the last time he'd suggested she pursue her old passion for painting, she'd dismissed the idea, saying she didn't have time. Emma set down her brush, wiping her hands nervously on her jeans. "I was going to tell you when you got back. It's a bit of a new development. 6 weeks now," Marcus added helpfully, seemingly oblivious to the tension. "Emma has extraordinary talent. We've been focusing on emotional expressionism, using personal narrative as inspiration." Daniel nodded numbly, his eyes drawn back to the painting. The woman on the canvas, his wife, looked toward the horizon with such yearning that it physically hurt to see it. What was she looking for? What was missing in her life that she sought it across painted oceans? "I should go," Marcus said, reading the room at last. "Emma, wonderful progress tonight. Remember what we discussed about perspective and negative space." He gathered his coat and a leather portfolio. "Nice to meet you, Daniel. Emma's work has really flourished these past weeks." After mumbled goodbyes, Marcus let himself out. The door closed with a soft click that echoed in the silent house. Emma stood motionless, her expression unreadable. Daniel struggled to reconcile his imagined homecoming with this baffling reality. He'd expected to find his wife asleep, not awake, and creating art with a stranger in their transformed living room. "How long have you been painting again?" he finally asked. Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Since February, after you left for the Singapore meetings." "But why the secrecy? Why not tell me?" Emma sighed, sinking onto the couch. "At first, it wasn't secrecy. It was just mine. Something that belonged only to me. Then it became, I don't know, a statement maybe." "A statement about what?" Emma gestured around the room. At the candles, the paintings propped against walls, the sketches pinned to a corkboard he hadn't noticed before. About reclaiming space. About remembering who I am when I'm not just waiting for my husband to come home. The words landed like stones. Daniel sat heavily on the arm of a chair, the velvet box in his pocket now seeming trivial, even patronizing. He'd brought her a trinket, while she'd been building a new identity in his absence. "I don't understand," he said, though part of him was beginning to. "Are you unhappy? Is this about us?" Emma looked at him directly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "This is about me, Daniel. But yes, it's about us too. It's about what happens to a marriage when one person disappears into their work and the other is left to fill the silence." Daniel stared at the painting again, at his wife's face turned away, looking toward distant shores, and he realized with terrible clarity, he hadn't come home to save his marriage. He'd come home to discover if there was anything left to save. "When did we stop talking to each other?" Daniel asked, his voice barely audible above the music still playing softly in the background. He reached for the remote and silenced it, needing clarity, wanting to hear every nuance in Emma's voice. "Talk all the time," Emma replied, but her tone lacked conviction. She moved to the kitchen, returning with a glass of water that she didn't drink, just held between her palms like a shield. "We text, we call, we exchange information." "That's not talking," Daniel said. "That's coordinating. Like business, associates." Emma didn't deny it. She set the water down untouched and walked to the painting, studying it as if seeing it for the first time. "Do you know what Marcus said about this piece?" He said, "I've captured profound isolation within a relationship." Isn't that interesting? He saw that without knowing anything about us. Daniel felt a flare of irrational jealousy. Not romantic jealousy, but something deeper. This stranger had recognized something in his wife that Daniel had missed entirely. Had seen her truth while Daniel was busy chasing promotions and praise from people who ultimately didn't matter. "Is that how you feel? Isolated?" he asked, dreading the answer. Emma turned to face him, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "Do you want the polite answer or the honest one?" "Since when do we have different versions?" Daniel countered. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew. They'd been editing themselves for months, offering sanitized versions of their feelings to avoid disrupting each other's carefully constructed worlds. "Yes," Emma said simply. "I feel isolated. I feel like I'm living in the margins of your life, in the spaces between meetings and flights and deals." She paused, visibly gathering courage. "And I'm tired of it, Daniel. I'm tired of being an afterthought." The accusation stung precisely because it contained truth. Daniel wanted to defend himself, to talk about providing for their future, about building security, but the words died in his throat. Those justifications suddenly seemed hollow. "The Tokyo deal," he said instead. "It closed yesterday. That's why I'm home early. I wanted to surprise you because I realized none of it matters without you." Emma's expression softened momentarily before hardening again. "That's the problem, isn't it? You have these moments of clarity, these grand epiphanies about what's important, but they never last. Next week there'll be another deal, another city, another reason to be gone." "Not this time," Daniel insisted. "Things will be different." "You've said that before." Emma's voice held no accusation, just a weary acceptance that hurt more than anger would have. "After London, after Dubai, after your father's funeral, for God's sake." "But nothing changes." Daniel flinched at the mention of his father. That was 11 months ago, the last time he'd truly examined his priorities. The resolutions he'd made standing at that graveside had evaporated within weeks, swallowed by the demands of his career. "I mean it this time," he said, hearing the desperation in his voice. "I'll cut back my travel. I'll work from home more. It's not about where you work," Emma interrupted. "It's about where you are when you're here." She tapped her temple. "Mentally, emotionally. You can sit right next to me and still be 1,000 miles away, planning your next presentation or analyzing your last meeting." The truth of her words resonated painfully. How many conversations had he half heard while checking email? How many evenings had he spent physically present, but mentally absent? "When did you start the painting lessons?" he asked, changing direction. After. I visited the Art Institute alone on our anniversary, Emma replied quietly. Daniel frowned, confused. Our anniversary was in October. We went to dinner at Maison. That was last year, Emma said. This year, 2 months ago, you were in Hong Kong. You sent flowers and called for 7 minutes between meetings. Daniel stared at her, horrified. Had he really forgotten? The details came rushing back. The video call from his hotel room. Emma in the silk dress he'd never seen in person, her smile not quite reaching her eyes as she thanked him for the roses. I'm sorry, he whispered, the inadequacy of those 2 words hanging in the air between them. I'm so sorry, Emma. I don't want apologies, she said, her voice breaking slightly. I want my husband back. I want the man who used to look at me like I was the most fascinating person he'd ever met, not an item on his to-do list. Daniel reached for the velvet box in his pocket, then stopped. No gift could fix this. No grand gesture could erase months of neglect. Instead, he asked the question he feared most. Is it too late for us? Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. I don't know, Daniel. That's the honest answer. I just don't know anymore. They migrated to the kitchen, neutral territory, where Emma made tea neither of them would drink. Daniel sat at the island counter, watching her familiar movements. The precise way she measured loose tea leaves, how she waited exactly 3 minutes before removing the infuser, the small spoon of honey she always added. These tiny rituals had been invisible to him before. Now they seemed precious, artifacts of a shared life he'd taken for granted. Do you remember our first apartment? Emma asked suddenly, setting his mug before him. That terrible walk-up in Evanston? Daniel smiled despite himself. With the leaky faucet and the radiator that sounded like it was harboring demons. And the neighbor who practiced cello at 3 a.m, Emma added, a ghost of laughter in her voice. Mrs. Petrovich, she brought us pierogi when we had that stomach flu. We were broke, Emma said softly. You were starting at the firm. I was finishing my degree. We could barely afford ramen some weeks. Daniel nodded, remembering those lean years with unexpected fondness. We used to count pennies for laundry. But we were happy, Emma said, her eyes meeting his. Weren't we? Or am I romanticizing the past? We were deliriously happy, Daniel confirmed. I remember thinking I didn't need anything else as long as I had you. Emma's smile was tinged with sadness. What happened to us? The question hung between them demanding an honest accounting. Success, Daniel said finally, or my warped understanding of it. He rotated his mug slowly, watching the amber liquid swirl. My father spent 30 years at the same factory, worked his way up to floor manager, then lost everything when they closed the plant. He never recovered from that. Not financially, not emotionally. Emma nodded. She knew this story, had watched. His father's slow decline from proud provider to bitter defeated old man. I promised myself I'd never be vulnerable like that, Daniel continued. I'd make myself indispensable. I'd climb so high they couldn't touch me. He laughed humorlessly. Instead, I built my own prison. Every promotion, every success just raised the stakes. I couldn't slow down because someone younger, hungrier would take my place. Your father would hate what you've become, Emma said, not unkindly. Not the success. He'd be proud of that. But the cost of it. He valued family above everything. I know, Daniel whispered. That's the cruel irony. I thought I was honoring him by becoming successful, but I've betrayed his most important lesson. They fell silent, the kitchen clock marking time with soft ticks. Outside, a car passed, its headlights briefly illuminating the room before darkness returned. Tell me about the painting, Daniel said eventually. When did you start again? Emma's face brightened slightly, the first genuine animation he'd seen since his arrival. After our non-anniversary, I was adrift. I wandered into this little gallery in Wicker Park. There was an exhibit of emotional expressionism, art that captures feeling rather than exact representation. She paused, sipping her tea. I stood in front of this one painting for almost an hour. It showed a woman dissolving at the edges, her form blending into her surroundings. The placard said it represented the loss of self within relationships. Emma's voice grew quieter. I cried right there in the gallery. Daniel felt pain lance through him at the image of his wife, alone and weeping before a stranger's art that spoke her unacknowledged truth. The gallery owner approached me, Emma continued, not to ask me to leave, but to talk about the painting. It turned out he was also the artist, Marcus. He asked why it affected me so strongly. I ended up telling him everything. Everything? Daniel echoed, unsure what that encompassed. About us. About feeling like I was disappearing. About how I used to paint in college but gave it up because it wasn't practical. She made air quotes around the last word. He invited me to join his workshop, said it might help me find myself again. And has it? Daniel asked, genuinely wanting to know. Emma considered the question carefully. It's given me a voice for feelings I couldn't articulate. It's reminded me that I exist as more than an accessory to your life. She looked up, her gaze direct. It's shown me that I matter, independently of you. That I have value beyond being your wife. Daniel absorbed this, recognizing both the truth and the warning in her words. Emma wasn't just pursuing a hobby, she was reclaiming her identity. The question was whether that reclamation would include him or leave him behind. I want to see more of your work, he said, if you're willing to share it. Emma studied him, as if gauging his sincerity. Why did you really come home early, Daniel? What exactly did you hope to find? It was the question he'd been avoiding, the one that required him to examine his deepest motivations. Daniel reached across the counter and gently took her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. I came home because I finally understood what I was losing, he said, and I desperately want the chance to get it back. Dawn found them still in the kitchen, empty mugs long gone cold. They'd talked through the night, really talked, for the first time in months. Words tumbled out, sometimes painful, sometimes tender, all necessary. They spoke of disappointments, and fears of dreams deferred and expectations unmet. Daniel confessed the growing emptiness of his achievements. Emma admitted the resentment she'd tried to deny. As morning light filtered through the windows, they moved to Emma's makeshift studio in what had once been their formal dining room. Daniel stood surrounded by her work, canvases propped against walls, sketches pinned to boards, palettes crusted with layers of color. He studied each piece carefully, seeing his wife's journey through her art. The earliest paintings showed isolation, lone figures in empty rooms, a woman staring out windows, hands reaching across voids. As the weeks progressed, the works grew, more vibrant, more assertive. Anger emerged in slashes of red and black. Then, more recently, exploration, abstract pieces full of movement and possibility. These are extraordinary, Daniel said, meaning it. You've always been talented, but this... He gestured to a particularly striking canvas showing a chrysalis splitting open. This is something more. Emma stood beside him, arms crossed, but posture more relaxed than earlier. Marcus says I'm finding my visual voice, that I'm moving from reaction to creation. He seems like a good teacher, Daniel acknowledged, swallowing his pride. He is. Emma paused. He's also gay and engaged to a neurosurgeon named Philip, just so we're clear. Daniel laughed, a genuine laugh that broke some of the tension still lingering between them. I wasn't. You were a little, Emma countered with the hint of a smile. It's okay. I probably would have wondered too. Daniel turned to face her fully. In the morning light, he noticed details he'd missed in the emotional chaos of the night. New highlights in her hair, a small tattoo on her inner wrist that hadn't been there when he left for Tokyo, a confidence in her posture that was subtly different. "You've changed," he said simply. Emma nodded. "I had to. I was disappearing." "Into our marriage?" "Into your orbit," she clarified. "There's a difference. A marriage should be a binary star system, with both bodies exerting their own gravitational pull. Ours became a planet and a moon." The metaphor struck Daniel with its accuracy. He had become the center of their universe, his career dictating their rhythm, his needs prioritized, while Emma revolved around his choices, reflecting his light rather than generating her own. "I want to see you," he said suddenly. "Not just, look at you, but really see you. The you that exists now, not the version I've been carrying in my head." Emma regarded him with surprise, then cautious hope. That's exactly what I've wanted to hear." She hesitated. "But seeing means recognizing change, accepting growth. I'm not the same woman you married, Daniel." "I wouldn't expect you to be," he replied. "That's the point of a life together, isn't it? To witness each other's evolution?" She studied him, searching for sincerity. "And what about your evolution? Are you really ready to change your relationship with work? Because I can't go back to how things were. I won't." Instead of immediately promising, Daniel considered the question seriously. Could he step back from the relentless pace, the international travel, the constant availability? What would that mean for his career trajectory, for the security he'd pursued so single-mindedly? "I don't have all the answers," he admitted finally. "But I know this. No success is worth losing you. I need to redefine what achievement means to me." Emma's expression softened. "That's more honest than another empty promise." She crossed to a canvas covered with a cloth, hesitated, then pulled the covering away. "This is what I've been working on this week." The painting showed two figures standing on opposite shores of a narrow but deep chasm. Both had arms outstretched, fingers almost but not quite touching across the divide. The background swirled, with turbulent colors, but a bridge was beginning to form between them, just the faintest outline, a possibility rather than a certainty. Daniel felt his throat tighten. "Is that us?" Emma nodded. "It's called The Choice. Because we have to decide whether to build the bridge." "Yes," she whispered. "And bridges take work from both sides." Daniel thought of the Tokyo contract in his briefcase upstairs, the commitments he'd made, the expectations of his firm. Then he looked at the painting again, at the fragile beginning of a connection that could either strengthen or crumble. "I choose you," he said, the words simple but weighted with promise. "I choose us." Emma didn't rush to embrace him or declare all forgiven. Instead, she nodded slowly. "Words are a start, but I need actions, Daniel. Consistent, sustained actions." "Day by day," he agreed, "beginning now." Outside, the neighborhood was awakening. Distant lawnmowers, children's voices, the everyday symphony of lives intertwined. Inside, two people stood before a painting of separation and possibility, the future unwritten, but the page no longer blank. Daniel reached for Emma's hand, relieved when her fingers twined with his. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. It was a choice to try. 3 weeks later, Daniel sat at his desk in the home office they'd converted from the guest bedroom. Through the window, he could see Emma in the backyard garden, kneeling among the newly planted vegetables, her hands working the soil. The morning, sunlight caught in her hair, turning it to copper and gold. His laptop displayed an email from his supervisor. "Tokyo, follow-up meeting. Your presence requested." Just a month ago, he would have booked the flight without hesitation. Now, he typed, a careful response. "I'll attend virtually. Please schedule during Chicago business hours." Send, no agonizing, no guilt. A boundary established firmly but professionally. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. Nakamura not happy about your remote attendance, says face-to-face builds trust. Daniel picked up the phone, then set it down without responding. Nakamura would adapt. Everyone would. The world wouldn't end if Daniel Morgan attended meetings via video conference, instead of flying halfway around the globe every other week. He glanced at the framed photograph newly installed on his desk. Not the standard corporate shot of him. And Emma at a company gala, but one taken just days ago, both of them paint-splattered and laughing after his first disastrous attempt at a still life in Emma's studio. His apple had looked more like an amorphous red blob, and her helpless laughter had been so contagious, he'd joined in despite his wounded pride. The painting lesson had been his idea. Teach me what you're learning, he'd asked 1 week after. His return. Not as a way to supervise her relationship with Marcus, as might have been his motivation before, but as a genuine attempt to enter her world, to understand this passion that had awakened in her. It had been humbling, frustrating, even to be so utterly incompetent at something she excelled in. But that, too, was part of the rebalancing between them. Daniel was used to mastery, to being the expert others deferred to. Sitting beside his wife, struggling with perspectives and proportions while she gently corrected his technique, had shifted something fundamental in their dynamic. A knock at the open door pulled him from his thoughts. Emma stood there, garden soil still under her fingernails, a tentative smile on her face. "Lunch break?" she asked. "I made that chickpea salad you liked." "Perfect timing," Daniel replied, closing his laptop. "I just finished setting boundaries with Tokyo." Emma's eyebrows raised. "And how did that feel?" "Terrifying," he admitted. "Liberating. Necessary." She nodded, understanding the magnitude of the change for him. They moved to the kitchen together, falling into the easy rhythm they were carefully rebuilding. Daniel gathered plates and utensils while Emma served the salad. They sat at the breakfast nook rather than the formal dining table, knees occasionally brushing beneath the small surface. "I have news," Emma said after they'd eaten in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Daniel looked up, attentive. "Good news?" "I think so." She pushed a piece of paper across the table. "The Chicago Arts Coalition is hosting a showcase for emerging local artists. Marcus submitted some of my work. They've accepted 3 pieces." Daniel scanned the acceptance letter, pride swelling in his chest. "Emma, this is incredible. Your first exhibition." "It's a group show," she qualified, but couldn't hide her excitement. 25 artists, small space, but still amazing, Daniel insisted. "We should celebrate. When is it?" Opening night is June 15th, a Thursday. Daniel reached for his phone to check his calendar, then stopped himself. Whatever was scheduled would be moved. "I'll be there," he promised. "Front and center." Emma's smile contained a hint of wariness. "It's the same week as the quarterly reviews. You usually—" "I'll be there," Daniel repeated firmly. "Nothing is more important." She studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I believe you." 3 simple words that meant everything. 3 weeks of consistent presence, of coming home at reasonable hours, of weekend mornings spent together rather than catching up on work. It wasn't enough to erase months of neglect, but it was enough to plant seeds of renewed trust. After lunch, they returned to their separate activities, Daniel to his conference calls, Emma to her garden. But something had shifted yet again, another small brick added to the foundation they were rebuilding. That evening, as dusk softened the edges of the day, they sat together on the porch swing. His idea, reclaiming a tradition long abandoned. Emma leaned against him, her body fitting against his as it always had. "I have a proposition," she said, her voice thoughtful. "What if we established a new rule? 1 week per month we both focus entirely on our work. You take your business, Trips, attend your late meetings, do whatever you need to do. I use that time for intensive painting sessions, gallery visits, workshops with Marcus. Daniel considered this. And the other 3 weeks? We prioritize us. We both work, of course. That's reality. But reasonable hours, home for dinner, weekends. Together. She turned to face him. Balance, not sacrifice. The old Daniel would have negotiated for more work time, would have explained why his career couldn't be confined to such neat parameters. The new Daniel, or perhaps the rediscovered Daniel, recognized the wisdom in her proposal. One condition, he said. During my travel week, I call every night. Not just to check in, but to really talk. And during my intensive art week, you don't feel neglected if I'm distracted and paint covered, Emma countered. Deal. Daniel extended his hand formally, and Emma shook it, laughing at the businesslike gesture. Then she leaned in and sealed it with a kiss, their first moment of genuine intimacy since his return. Later, as they prepared for bed, Daniel noticed Emma studying him in the bathroom mirror as he brushed his teeth. What? He asked, mouth foamy. I'm trying to decide if I like this version of you, she said thoughtfully. The one who comes home on time. The one who asks about my day and actually listens to the answer. The one who suggested we plant tomatoes even though you hate gardening. Daniel rinsed and turned to her. Is the verdict still out? Emma's expression softened. No. I decided about 10 minutes ago, watching you wash the dishes without being asked. She stepped closer, resting her hand on his chest. I like this Daniel very much. I just hope he sticks around. He's trying, Daniel said quietly. Some days are harder than others. Sometimes the old patterns call like sirens. I know, Emma acknowledged. For me too. It's easier to withdraw than to engage sometimes. Easier to nurse resentment than to forgive. They climbed into bed, the familiar mattress dipping beneath their weight. Emma switched off the lamp, darkness enveloping them. In the quiet, protected by night, words came more easily. I'm still afraid, Daniel admitted to the ceiling. Afraid I'll fail at this. Afraid you'll decide I'm not worth the effort after all. Emma's hand found his beneath the covers. I'm afraid too, she whispered. That's how I know this matters. Their fingers intertwined, a bridge forming across the sheets. Not a repair completed, but a restoration begun. The gallery buzzed with conversation, the white walls adorned with artwork from Chicago's emerging talents. Daniel stood alone before Emma's triptych, 3 canvases that formed a visual narrative when viewed in sequence. The first showed a woman, confined within a glass box, her form blurred as if seen through water, reaching toward the viewer with desperate hands. The second depicted the glass shattering, shards suspended in mid-explosion, the woman's figure more defined, her expression one of determination rather than desperation. The third showed her standing amid the broken glass, fully realized, vibrant, colors replacing the muted tones of the earlier pieces. What do you think? Marcus appeared beside him, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. He offered one to Daniel, who accepted with a nod of thanks. I think my wife is extraordinarily talented, Daniel replied honestly. And I think I'm seeing parts of her story I wasn't ready to acknowledge before. Marcus studied the paintings with him. Emma has made remarkable progress. Few artists develop such a distinctive voice so quickly. He glanced at Daniel. She says you've been supportive. That makes a difference. Daniel sipped his champagne, remembering the late nights he'd brought her tea in the studio, the Saturdays he'd accompanied her to galleries, the Sunday morning. Critiques where she'd nervously shown him her latest work. I'm trying to make up for lost time. That's not how creativity works, Marcus said mildly. You can't recover yesterday's inspiration, but you can honor today's. Before Daniel could respond, a small commotion near the gallery entrance drew their attention. Emma had arrived, stunning in a simple black dress he'd never seen before. Her hair styled differently, an artist's confidence in her bearing. Several people immediately approached her, congratulating her, asking questions about her work. Daniel watched with a curious mixture of pride and humility. This was Emma in her element, not as his wife, not as an extension of his life, but as herself. Wholly, independently herself. "Go on," Marcus encouraged. "She's been watching the door for you." Daniel moved through the crowd, catching Emma's eye over the shoulder of a woman gesturing enthusiastically about one of her paintings. Emma's face brightened, a private smile passing between them before she returned her attention to the conversation. He didn't interrupt, didn't claim her attention or space. Instead, he circulated, listening to comments about Emma's work, occasionally introducing himself not as Emma's husband, but simply as Daniel, letting her artistic identity take center stage. An hour later, as the event reached its peak, the gallery owner called for attention and began recognizing the featured artists. When Emma's name was called, spontaneous applause erupted, louder than for most others, Daniel noted with satisfaction. Emma Morgan's emotional expressionist works have generated significant interest tonight, the owner announced. I'm pleased to share that all 3 pieces in her Liberation series have sold. A ripple of impressed murmurs spread through the crowd. Emma stood frozen in surprise until someone gently pushed her forward. She thanked the gallery and her supporters with graceful composure. But when she mentioned her teacher, Marcus, and my husband, Daniel, whose journey with me inspired this series, her voice wavered slightly. Later, as the crowd thinned and the evening wound down, Daniel and Emma stood together before her now-sold triptych. "Congratulations, artist," he said softly. "How does it feel?" Emma leaned against him, exhaustion and elation competing in her expression. Surreal, validating, terrifying. Terrifying? "Now I have to create more," she explained. "Live up to this moment, and part of me wonders if I can." Daniel recognized the fear. It mirrored his own professional anxieties, the constant pressure to exceed previous achievements. But instead of offering empty reassurances, he asked, "What would you tell me if I expressed that same fear about my work?" Emma considered this. "I'd say that creativity isn't linear, that each project has its own integrity, that you can only do your best with what's in front of you." She smiled ruefully. "And I'd tell you to stop overthinking and just get on with it." "Sound advice," Daniel noted. "Perhaps you should take it." Emma laughed, the sound light and free. "Perhaps I should." They gathered her belongings, the small notepad where she'd jotted collectors' contact information, the exhibition catalog with her name printed alongside established artists, the congratulatory card signed by all 25 participants. Small, mementos of a significant threshold crossed. Outside, the June evening was warm and clear, the Chicago skyline illuminated against the darkening sky. They decided to walk home, taking the longer route along the lakefront. "I have something to tell you," Daniel said as they strolled hand in hand. "I gave notice today." Emma stopped walking. "You quit your job?" "Not exactly," Daniel clarified. "I'm transitioning to a senior advisory role. Fewer hours, minimal travel, better work-life balance. But your career trajectory is changing direction," he finished. "Not ending, just realigning with my priorities." Emma studied him in the lamplight. "Are you sure this isn't some grand gesture that you'll resent later?" Daniel shook his head. "I've spent 3 months reevaluating everything. This feels right. And the truth is, I've been unhappy at work for longer than I've been willing to admit." The prestige and money masked that reality. They resumed walking, the gentle lapping of lake water accompanying their steps. Emma squeezed his hand. "So what happens now? For both of us?" "I don't know exactly," Daniel admitted. "You'll paint, I'll consult, we'll figure out the rest together." That's a very unbusinesslike plan from a man who once color-coded our vacation itineraries Emma teased. Daniel laughed. Maybe I'm learning to embrace uncertainty. A certain artist has been influencing me. They paused at a viewpoint overlooking the water. The city lights reflected on the dark surface, creating the illusion of stars below matching those emerging above. Emma leaned against the railing, her face tilted up to catch the breeze. 6 months ago, would you have imagined this night? She asked. Daniel thought back to the corporate-focused man he'd been, efficient, ambitious, increasingly hollow. Not in 1,000 years. When you walked in that night and found me painting with Marcus, were you disappointed? Did you feel betrayed? Daniel considered the question carefully. Not betrayed. Disoriented. As if I'd walked into the wrong house, the wrong life. He paused, but now I think it was exactly what needed to happen. I needed to see you reclaiming yourself to recognize how I'd lost myself. Emma turned to face him fully. The funny thing is, I started painting again as a way to cope with your absence. I never imagined it would help bring you back. Really, back, not just physically present? Life's greatest paradox, Daniel mused. Sometimes we need to separate to find our way back together. Is that what we did? Find our way back? Daniel considered their journey, the painful confrontation, the honest reckoning, the careful rebuilding of trust through daily choices and consistent presence. I think we found our way forward, he said finally. To something new rather than, what was? Emma nodded, satisfaction in her expression. I like that better. They continued their walk home, no longer the same couple who had occupied that house months earlier. No longer orbiting in separate spheres, one dominant and one diminished. Instead, they moved in tandem, two complete individuals choosing connection, over isolation, growth over stagnation, presence over absence. When they arrived home, Emma paused on the porch, looking at their front door. Do you remember that night, when you surprised me? Every detail, Daniel confirmed. I was terrified. You'd misunderstand what you were seeing. That you'd make assumptions about Marcus, about me, about us. I almost did, Daniel admitted. Old insecurities die hard. Emma took his face in her hands, her eyes searching his. But you didn't. You stayed. You listened. You saw me, really saw me, perhaps for the first time in years. And you gave me the chance to become someone worthy of being seen by you, Daniel replied. Not everyone would have. They stood on the threshold of their home, transformed by absence and return, by loss and recovery, by the courage to face difficult truths, and the strength to forge new patterns. Emma unlocked the door and stepped inside, pulling Daniel gently by the hand. Come on, she said softly. Let's go home. And so they did. Not to the home they had left, but to the one they had built together through the art of beginning again. Every paradox begins with a question. If you love unraveling life's biggest mysteries, hit subscribe and join the Life Paradox, where every story bends reality.